Welcome to Activista Rise Up. I am your host, Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. You can listen to this show by following me on all my social media platforms. Activista Rise Up is about leaders and what moves them to take action. We hope to inspire you to join causes you care about or just support those leaders who are advancing economic and social justice. Today, you will meet a fellow academic thought leader, the amazing Dr. Khyati Joshi. She is a full professor at the School of Education at Fairleigh Dickinson University. Dr. Joshi is a scholar and a top leader on the intersection of race, religion, and immigration in the United States. She is the founder of the Institute for Teaching Diversity and Social Justice, which customizes workshops and educational programs for organizations and professionals seeking to build their competency on issues of social justice and race. Dr. Joshi is the author and editor of multiple books and has contributed to numerous groundbreaking texts and journals in her field. She is an Asian Pacific Islander leader and someone who is at the intersection of supporting gender issues, religion issues, and racial justice. I consider her a role model and someone who I look up to as a model of how to grow in your academic career, but also stay connected to issues of social and economic justice. Dr. Joshi, welcome to Activista Rise Up.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I've been wanting to have you on my show because I consider you one of a fellow academic activists and someone who I look up to as being able to have a full and successful academic career in your writing, but also caring about issues in your community and issues of women engagement in politics. So we had done some work together around some commissions in New Jersey and nationally around issues of the Asian Pacific diaspora. But I want my audience to learn from you who you are and what got you into academia and then to become a thought leader, a leader in academia and activism.
Oh, sure. Well, I think both were in me from a very young age. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and spent many of my summers in India. So I was born in India and immigrated here at a very young age. But my parents, it was very important to them that I know where I come from. So literally would ship me home every summer, for which I'm eternally grateful because of that, I'm a fluent Gujarati speaker. And I'm very connected to my family in India. But growing up in Atlanta, Dr. Campos-Medina, it was not so easy to be a little brown Hindu girl. If you weren't Black, like people didn't know what to do with you. If you weren't white, people didn't know what to do with you. And on top of that, I was Hindu. My family was Hindu, right? So it was kind of like, what's that? So it was tough, and I faced a lot of bullying and harassment, and that's really why I do so much of the work I do today with my teachers. I want to make sure that kids, immigrant kids, kids of color, transgender kids, gay and lesbian kids don't face the bullying harassment that we know they're facing, right? And helping them deal with it. So being housed in the School of Education is a privilege for me because I get to work with teachers and school administrators, which I love. And that's kind of how I ended up in School of Ed, and I'm trained as a social scientist. And growing up, while I would face this bullying and harassment at school, and while I wish I could have changed my skin color, I was very proud to be Indian.
Yes.
And I grew up in a very strong Indian community. We were mighty, but small but mighty. My parents helped found one of the Hindu temples in Atlanta, and so I was very involved in community activism. And quite frankly, I often say that being involved in democratic politics is no different than being involved in local Hindu temple politics. It's all the same, and so I got my start there of speaking out and taking charge and leading things. And so I've had both of those kind of things in me from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it's exciting to me to hear you talk about how your own cultural traditions of being involved in the temple and being involved, connected to your culture, also is part of who you are as an American, right? Because you are engaged in politics. You were in Atlanta, advancing this idea that we are a melting pot in America, and even though we are connected to our culture, we're still Americans, right? And that has was being able to hold this country together for so long. I, we are in a very divided moment in this country, in a place where the whole idea of can the multi-diverse religious country and diverse in race country stay together and hold together the belief on our democratic institutions. I know you study this, you write about this. So what do you think of this moment, and is this a new moment in America? And some people argue that it's not, that we've been here, it's just a little bit exacerbated. So how do you feel about this moment, and how are you working to try to get us to the point of understanding that this is, how do we move from here?
Yeah, so a lot of the racism, xenophobia that we see today, anti-immigrant attitudes, we have seen before throughout United States history. 150 years ago, we were, there was anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic attitudes, and today we're seeing, everyone who's not Christian being attacked, right? And so I would agree, there's no question we've seen it before. And at the same time, it's also a little different in that so many different identities of people are being attacked simultaneously, right? And so it's, I have to say that I did not think when I started doing this work 24 years ago, I did not think that what I did every day would be on the news and every day could be a fight. And that's what it is right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah,
That's what it is. And although we live in New Jersey and we're not facing what my colleagues and community folks are facing in Florida or Texas, the shooting in Allen, Texas,
yeah,
5 Asian Americans were killed, many from, I believe, a Chinese American family, and then one Indian American woman who was shopping at the outlet mall for her birthday.
yeah,
It's just heartbreaking, right? And we know that the alleged gunman targeted that mall because of the racial and religious minorities that often shop there. So it is, of course, it's a little different. We've never had a January 6th.
yeah,
And, so white Christian nationalism is certainly on the rise. But I want to say that white Christian nationalism sits on this foundation of white Christian privilege, which means it's,
yeah,
and when I say that, white Christian privilege is just in our everyday life. It's part of everyday society. And even those who don't want to benefit from those Christian privileges, that Christian advantage that exists in society, have it. And then there's white Christian nationalism that takes things to a different level.
yeah. And this is what the threat and against our democratic institutions is so scary, right? Because in a democracy, it's the institutions that create this plurality in which you can be a non-white Christian or you can be a non-Christian and still have had the same protections, right? So, and that's the scary part, I think, right now that we're facing in this country is this attack on our democracy based on this idea of religion and race. So that's what I wanted to talk to you, because I know you're ingrained in doing this research and this work. And I like what you said at the beginning when you said that you like working with teachers who are at the forefront of talking to students. How do you prepare an educator to be able to have these discussions in their classrooms and perhaps have the right tools to address it when they come in their schools, because that's when we need to start having these conversations with our children.
Absolutely. The first place to start is with their life. They have to have a better sense of themselves. They have to become aware of their various identities, gender, race, class, religion, sexual orientation, and how they operate in US society. And they have to figure out through exercises we do, does that identity give them advantage in our society? For example, if, I'm heterosexual, I have heterosexual privilege, I have advantage. Society is made for me. I could easily marry, I can hold my husband's hand in public without fear of retribution, right? So they have to learn which identities are advantaged and then which identities are disadvantaged. So for me, again, that would be being a racial minority, a religious minority. So it's important that teachers themselves figure this out about their lives, because then they can start seeing what's going on in society. Privilege is often invisible, especially to the people who have it.
Yes.
We have to make it visible. And once you do that, and I lead my educators through various activities and readings, then we can start seeing the injustices. And it's only when you can see the injustice that you can change things to fight for justice.
Yeah. I often tell my students that, white privilege, the white students, you inherit it. You didn't cause it, but it's your responsibility to figure out what to do
That's
with
right.
the inheritance that you received.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think that maybe having those conversations with white allies, they're difficult. And we also have to be prepared to not be for their defensiveness, because it's about like trying to get them to understand what their own privilege is. How do you have that conversation with white allies so they also began having the conversations themselves without us having to be in the room for the conversation of privilege to be present?
Well, that's the benefit of doing this work at an undergraduate and graduate level, right? There are readings, there are reflection papers they have to do. I have quizzes in my classes because you need to learn and you need to know real United States history. Because privilege, if, for example, if we're talking white privilege, it's a product of systemic racism, right? That's where it comes from. As you said, it's nothing the individual did. They inherited this privilege, but that privilege is embedded in our legal and social infrastructure. Right. So they have to understand the Immigration Act of 24. They've got to understand the Immigration Act of 1917 and all of these other 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act and certain things in order to understand where that white privilege comes from.
Yeah. And this is a very important conversation to have often with our white working class allies, because there is this moment in the United States in which the white working class is also in very economic turmoil. They're in very economic precarity. And rather than have this discussion about, and they can say, well, I am poor too. I don't have opportunity too. So I don't have privilege. So I often find myself having to have those discussions. And have you ever had those discussions in your classroom with your students?
Oh, all the time, right? So initially they'll bring up idea, we'll be talking about this, and my working class students, sometimes my Jewish students will say, Professor Joshi, I don't have privilege. I grew up poor, or I don't have privilege because I experience anti-Semitism. And what I do is I use this tool called the Matrix of Oppression. Your listeners can Google it, and it's just a chart that's helpful. And if you are of Ashkenazi descent, if you are of European descent, you're Ashkenazi Jewish, well, you're white and you have white privilege and you experience anti-Semitism because of Christian normativity and Christian hegemony in our country. If you are a white person who is working class or poor, you face classism, you face a disadvantage in terms of class and economics in our society. and you can have white privilege. It's not an either or, it's a both and. But they need an opportunity to be able to work through that, to process that, to have discussions, to come to that understanding instead of it just be something that's presented.
Yeah. I'll make sure we have the link to doing this exercise so that we all begin to have the tools to talk about these issues. To me, as a labor organizer and as a labor scholar, this is where I feel that having these conversations in our workplaces and in the schools is so important, creating this commonality, understanding of our common experience. This is why I'm so excited about all the activism with workers and young workers and the solidarity that is creating among different classes and different races, understanding that we are all in the same place, and so we have to come together to unite in order to be able to have the same opportunity in safeguard this country. So I appreciate that analysis of understanding the different layers of privilege. So you also do a lot of education about the experience of Asian Americans and Indian Americans in the United States, and we have seen an increase in hate crimes against the Asian American community. So tell us a little bit about why doing the work on elevating the story of Asian Americans is so important, and how and tell us a little bit of the work that you've done on that area.
Sure. So I sit as a scholar, I'm interdisciplinary. I sit at the crossroads of religion, ethnic studies, Asian American studies, education, all of these places, which I love actually. And as someone who I hope to be able to teach Asian American studies in New Jersey. I haven't done that in about 20 years. We're a little behind when it comes to ethnic studies on the East Coast compared to the West Coast and even the Midwest.
Yeah.
But I'm involved in many different ways. And the thing about Asian Americans in the US is that because of this idea that they are the model minority, which is a stereotype, right? So just very briefly, the model minority stereotype is a product of the Immigration Act of 1965. We had a set of visa preferences for Immigration Act of 65, and the top visa preference when our doors opened up, our U.S. immigration was almost at a standstill between 1924 and 1965, with a handful of exceptions. And when we opened our doors in 65, we said, hey, all y'all from around the world can come, and we're going to provide you these, we're going to have these preferences. And preferences were given to people with MDs, PhDs, engineering degrees, all kinds of advanced degrees. And so this is how a lot of Asian folks immigrated to the United States. So by 1967, U.S. News and World Report had an article that said, Asians are the model minority, and ever since then, there's this sense that all Asian American students do well. Asian Americans don't need social services. They take care of themselves. They're all upper middle class, which is just not true. Yeah. The United States got a slice of the pie. It didn't get representatives of the entire pie from various Asian countries, right? And so that's really, really critical. The other thing is, and I'm sure you're familiar with this in your labor organizing, is that because of this, the model minority myth has been used as a racial wedge to keep racial minority groups apart, because essentially it's saying, hey, Black people, why can't you be like the Asian people? Yes. Okay. Hey, Hispanic people, why can't you be like the Asian people and Asian Americans? And then Asian Americans walk around with a chip on their shoulders. Right? We're all that, which is just not true, right? Yeah. And so it's really important to understand that. I will tell you, you wouldn't believe the number of times I come across people when they hear I identify as a woman of color, they're surprised. Black people and white people, because I'm Asian. They're like, well, aren't you white? I'm like, do I look white? Yes. Right. Do I look white to you? And we know that race is more than just what you see, but it always surprises me a little bit. It just happened a couple of weeks ago. And so there is this sense that Asians are kind of white, but that's not true. And when you know real United States history, you know the discrimination that has happened in a very real and systematic way against various Asian Pacific American groups. So, these days it is very unfortunate with the anti-Asian hate on the rise. And, during the pandemic with the previous president talking about the Kung flu virus and all this. And my East Asian American friends and colleagues were really facing the brunt of it. But apparently, and I was very shocked to learn this about a year and a half ago, but really Filipinos, South Asians, hate crimes against everybody has been on the rise. And what's been most disturbing is that so many of the elderly in our community have been targeted.
Yeah. Is this the level of hate and how it's expressed is surprising. It shouldn't be. I mean, I don't want to be surprised to say it, but at the same time, it's like, oh my God, why is this happening, and what can we do about it? I was also very because you can see it in the attacks against the Asian elderly, also against women, being attacked in public. But also, I was very surprised and very concerned about, for example, our Asian American politicians, like here in New Jersey, Sadr Jaffer, who actually said that one of the reasons that she's stepping back from being in public office is all the level of hate that she has received as a woman of color, trying to have a public voice. So I wanted to say, how do you support that community so that they can so that we can find a place of healing and also safety? Because we shouldn't allow it to happen to our fellow sister, but also how is the community coming together to address those issues of the hate shown against them?
Well, I think we, need to do a better job of that, and I would say that the larger community, one of the things to do is to understand that Asian Americans are often invisible. And actually, Jersey Promise, an organization here in New Jersey, we put out a report in 2019, and the number one experience across different Asian ethnic groups, religious groups, linguistic groups, class backgrounds, careers, was invisibility. Asian Americans feel invisible. So we have to understand that happens. And then when someone starts speaking out, when you have an Assemblywoman Jaffer and others actually out there trying to make things better, people aren't used to seeing that.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, Assemblywoman Jaffer was probably getting a lot of anti-Muslim hate.
Yes.
And it's really unfortunate because you can be really strong, and she is very strong, but it does take a toll. And I know she has a young daughter, and I mean, these things take a toll. And at the end of the day, you have to look out for yourself and your family, right? But I think the first thing is that the larger community and our, fellow, people of color, to understand that, that Asian Americans struggle, that Asian Americans in the workplace often don't get promotions because they're not seen as leadership material. They're seen as workhorses.
Yeah.
That everything's okay for them. No, everything is not okay for them.
Yeah.
And so understanding that is really critical, because most people will tell you they just feel invisible.
As you all come together and try to figure out how to defend yourself in our community, how can we better allies to do that to you?
So I think that number one, believe our stories, believe our experiences. I think right now what's really critical, what I need everyone to do, and this is a place where you can take action, is we have a new mandate in the state of New Jersey to teach about the Asian Pacific American experience and history. And please make sure your local school districts are doing that. Show up at the board meetings where some of this stuff is kind of being attacked, and make sure that it's not just the Asian American parents who are there saying, hey, what are the books? And let's make sure we have the books, but that it's all parents saying this is important. Because there are many shared histories across communities of color. And if we knew those more, it would probably make your job a little easier in terms of organizing, because we would see the shared struggles and the shared victories.
That's another issue that really worries me. This movement, not across the country, to ban books that tell the real story of different groups and gender non-conforming adults in this country. So how do we counteract that? I like that you mentioned we should all show up to the board meetings and oppose book banning, but what else can we do in that issue, because it's very concerning?
Well, I think making sure that Board of Eds can't just selectively remove books is so very important. And so you show up to the board meeting, but you speak out. We make sure that, we shouldn't have to do this, but if we need to do fundraising in order to get the books that need to be taught because the board won't, buy them, or somehow make sure the teachers are okay. I mean, if the board's not going to allow certain books to be taught, it is going to be difficult teachers can't just use them, but making sure that there's, extra programs going on in your community so that students can go and learn about what's happening. I mean, it is absolutely, I don't have a word for what's going on in Florida in terms of the removal of African-American history from so much of the curriculum. And it's shameful. And what it really shows is how when we don't teach real United States history, then what can happen? And that's the product right now. What we're seeing is because we didn't really learn what happened in this country, people can't deal when we're trying to show what really did happen.
Well, education, the work that educators like yourself and in schools and universities are doing is critical to keep this issue alive and not allow this conservative mentality that is anti-learning, anti-book to continue to grow. So what are you working on now that you would like your listeners to know about and to follow you, to engage more with you on that work?
Well, I continue to speak out about race and religion in America. We really have to understand that so much of whiteness, we need to understand the role of Christianity in the construction of whiteness. My book, White Christian Privilege, kind of lays that out historically to show why some of the things that are happening today. So I continue to do that. My most recent project that I'm embarking on coming this Tuesday is a fellowship for teachers to teach Asian American stories.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so I'll be doing a full day workshop and then embarking on about a 6-month program with 6 fellows to make sure they know. These are social studies teachers, ELA teachers in New Jersey, who have been teaching and doing this, but to get them prepped to be able to go out and do workshops with other districts. So that's my most recent thing. And then, of course, for the last 15 years, I've been running summer institutes on teaching for diversity and social justice, where we address various social identities in terms of history and law, but also get educators to look at who they are. And then most importantly, well, not most importantly, but very importantly, then how do you implement anti-bias education and culturally responsive teaching in the classroom?
Awesome. That sounds so exciting. Can teachers themselves just sign up for your workshop, so they have to go through their institutions?
No, people can just sign up. You can go to idsj.us, or you can go to khyatijoshi.com and it will link you over as well.
Oh, so great. We'll share that information with our listeners. And I know that those who care about having a full education and teaching whole children what it is to function in this society, I know that they would love to learn from you and learn the skills to be able to have these conversations in a classroom. So that's exciting
Yes.
that you're offering that up. So we'll be sharing that information.
Thank you.
Anything that you will tell young people or about what this moment is and how they should engage in these issues right now?
You can't stay silent. You cannot stay silent. Sometimes when people don't know what to say, they think it's best to say nothing at all, and that's just not true. Give it a try. Give it your best shot. If somebody says, "Hey, that was offensive," apologize and then move on, right? But we cannot stay silent. And also, you have to ask yourself, are you only speaking out about issues that affect you as a minority, or are you speaking out and being an ally for others as well? Are you in it for justice or just us? And that's really, really important, right? Sometimes my own community folks will come to me and say, we need to do this, we need to do this. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, well, where have you been? We've had Black people dying for hundreds of years. We have all of this happening with Black Lives Matter. Where are you? How come you only care when it's affecting the Indian American community? That's not okay. We've got to take care of each other. We've got to care for one another. So I would say, please, please, please keep in mind, are you in it for justice or just us?
Yeah, I like that. And if you need help getting the right tools and to have these conversations, you can follow Dr. Joshi on her line, and I'm sure she will provide you with the right tools to be able to be a good ally to others who are feeling the brunt of injustice, which is what being an ally is speaking out and taking a position and defending others who are under attack. Thank you so much, Dr. Joshi, for joining me in this conversation. We'll be sharing all your resources and information with our listeners. And thank you for all that you do to advance issues of diversity and equity and bringing us all together to have these important conversations to save our democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The message here is stand up for justice, not just for us. Take a stand, speak out, and if you need the tools to have the right conversations with your friends and sometimes with your family, look for the leaders like Dr. Joshi who are developing the tools and educating the next generation of young people to take a stand for our democracy and for justice in this country. Thank you for joining Activista Rise Up, and see you next week.